Hey guys, today we're talking about how God built the horizon. Dim your lights, get comfortable, and let this gentle story guide you to peace. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this helps you fall asleep. Let's start. Before the world knew distance, before light and dark learned to share the same breath, there was only openness. An endless field of possibility where nothing touched, and yet everything waited to meet. God moved through that space like a thought not yet spoken. He wasn't looking for creation, he was looking for balance. He had already sung the stars into being, and they burned beautifully, but too high, too far, too certain. He had shaped the earth and the seas, and they shimmered with promise, but they lived apart, divided by endless longing. Something in him ached when he saw that distance, the ache of incompleteness, the whisper that even beauty can be lonely. So he decided to build something that could hold two opposites in one gentle line. He imagined a place where sky could lean down to kiss the sea without drowning, where the sun could rest upon the edge of the earth without falling, where endings could look like beginnings if seen from the right angle. That thought became his new creation, the horizon. But he didn't build it with hands. He began with silence. For days that didn't yet have names, he watched light travel, tracing its edges across the vastness, searching for where it might stop. He noticed that light never really ended. It only faded into softer versions of itself. The same was true for shadow. It didn't conquer, it simply waited for its turn to speak. Maybe, he thought, the secret of peace is not separation, but sharing. So he took a handful of dawn and a breath of dusk and placed them side by side. The two resisted at first, each unsure of what it meant to coexist. Day wanted to shine, night wanted to rest. But in their tension, he saw beauty, the soft glow of becoming. That glow stretched across the emptiness like a quiet bridge, and for the first time, there was a line between heaven and earth. It wasn't solid, it shimmered, trembling like breath over glass. God smiled. The horizon had been born, fragile and eternal at once. He leaned closer to examine his work. It was delicate, barely there, the thinnest thread of light dividing the infinite, but it carried meaning far beyond its size. You, he whispered to it, will teach the world where to look. Because before the horizon, everything was directionless. The sea didn't know where to end. The sky didn't know where to begin, and the creatures that would one day wander this place would never know which way to dream. The horizon would become their compass, their comfort, the gentle promise that no matter how far they walked, there would always be something waiting at the edge. As he shaped it, he began to paint with emotion instead of color. He gave the horizon patience from the ocean, grace from the clouds, and curiosity from the wind. Each dawn would stretch it wide, and each sunset would fold it tenderly back. He wanted it to feel alive, not a line of separation, but a heartbeat. The horizon would breathe with the rhythm of day and night, teaching the world that all opposites belong to the same truth. When he was done, he rested on a cloud and watched his creation begin to move. It wasn't still, as he'd expected. It shifted constantly, bending to the gaze of those who looked upon it. For a bird, it curved. For a mountain, it stretched. For a sailor, it danced. The horizon changed shape to fit the dreamer. God marveled at that. So this is what freedom looks like, he said softly. He hadn't built a border. He'd built perspective. The sea rolled beneath it, testing its reflection. The first wave rose high enough to touch the bottom of the line and shimmered in delight. "You are where I end," the ocean said. "No," whispered the horizon. "I am where you begin again." The conversation continued endlessly, and God listened with a smile. He realized he had created not a boundary, but a relationship. As evening fell for the first time, the sun hovered just above the new line and hesitated. It had never needed to set before. "What happens if I go beyond?" it asked. God looked at it kindly. "Then the sky will remember you through color, and the world will rest knowing you'll rise again." The sun nodded, understanding without words. It sank slowly, and the horizon caught its light like a soft hand catching a falling star. The sky burned with oranges and golds, purples and blush. The world gasped in color, and God felt joy ripple through everything. "This," he whispered, "is the shape of hope." That night, when darkness finally covered everything, he stayed to watch the horizon disappear. Without light, the line faded into nothing. For a moment, he wondered if it had died. But then he heard the ocean breathing beneath him, steady, eternal. The horizon was still there, unseen but present. It existed in memory, in promise, in the place where awareness and faith overlap. God smiled again. "You don't vanish," he said. "You only rest." As he spoke, the stars leaned closer to listen. They had always been proud of their distance, but the horizon's humility moved them. One by one, they lowered their light, just enough to reflect faintly in the water. For the first time, heaven bowed to earth. God felt a deep peace wash over him. The horizon had done what even light could not. It had made the infinite intimate. Centuries passed like seconds in his timeless heart. The world grew. Rivers found paths, mountains reached upward, and creatures began to stir. Wherever there was wonder, the horizon was near. It drew eyes upward and downward, teaching all who looked that beauty is not confined to one direction. Birds learned to chase it. Poets would one day name it. Lovers would walk toward it hand in hand, never reaching but never needing to. It became the holy illusion that made all motion meaningful. But even perfection needs contrast. One day, clouds gathered too thickly and hid the horizon completely. The world below panicked, thinking the edge had vanished forever. The ocean grew restless, the wind lost its direction, even the sun faltered in its descent. God watched with compassion. "You've forgotten what I taught you," he whispered. So he parted the clouds, just enough for one thin ribbon of light to appear. The world sighed in relief, its rhythm restored. "You must never see the horizon as guarantee," he told the sky. "It is faith. You do not need to see it to know it's there." And so, the horizon became a test of trust. On clear days, it was joy. On stormy ones, it was belief. Over time, this became the foundation of human hope. When people stared out to sea and saw nothing but distance, they still knew there was more beyond. That knowing, the quiet certainty that the unseen continues, was his favorite part of creation. He added one final gift to the horizon: reflection. At dawn and dusk, when the world holds its breath between transitions, the horizon would double itself in the water. It was his way of saying, everything that exists above also exists within. He loved symmetry, not for order, but for intimacy. What was mirrored was not copied. It was understood. Years later, when humanity came, they would stand at shorelines and feel small, not realizing that smallness was sacred. It was the soul's way of remembering scale, the reminder that awe is the beginning of wisdom. They would paint the horizon, chase it, photograph it, and still never capture it. God knew they never would, because the horizon isn't seen, it's felt. It's the part of the world that looks back at you when you look out. When he saw how the first people reacted to it, he wept softly. Not from sadness, but from fullness. They reached their hands toward it as if to touch the edge of the sky, laughing, crying, unsure why their hearts felt so open. They didn't have the word beautiful yet, but that was the moment it was born. God stayed with them through the night, unseen but near, watching how they told stories about where the sky met the sea. Some said it was the doorway to heaven. Others said it was where souls travel after rain. One child whispered that the horizon was God's eyelid, closing and opening each day to dream the world anew. That one made him laugh gently. As centuries unfolded, the horizon became more than a line. It became a rhythm. Every sunrise and sunset was a heartbeat, a pulse that reminded the world that balance is alive. Day chased night, night embraced day, and in their endless dance, everything found purpose. Even death, he realized, was just another horizon. One more line where what ends meets what continues. He decided that each person's life would have its own horizon too. Invisible, thresholds between what they were and what they were becoming. Childhood fading into youth, fear turning into courage, silence ripening into song. Every transformation, every surrender would carry the same grace as light meeting sea. If they remember this, he thought, they will never fear change. When morning returned again, the horizon stretched wider than before, as though it had grown overnight. God stood at its center, though there was no true center, only the illusion of one, and watched how the air shimmered between what was above and what was below. The world was learning to breathe in rhythm now. The waves no longer rushed to meet the sky, and the sky no longer leaned too heavily upon the sea. Everything had found a way to exist without collision. Balance, he realized, was not the absence of desire but the understanding of it. Creation did not stop yearning. It simply learned how to yearn beautifully. That was the lesson the horizon whispered every dawn. God smiled at that. He loved how something so delicate could teach so powerfully. As light rose from the east, he noticed how it first kissed the edge of the world, the horizon catching the fire like a wick. The first flames of color spread slowly, turning blue into gold, and for a moment, he felt as though he were watching hope itself, learning to stand. The horizon was not just a line anymore. It was a promise that day would always return. That darkness, no matter how patient, could never keep everything. He leaned closer to the glowing rim of the world and whispered, "Thank you." The wind carried his gratitude across the water, scattering it into ripples that gleamed briefly before fading back into calm. The sea understood. Gratitude, like light, was meant to move. He began to walk along the horizon again, though walking was not quite the word for what he did. He drifted between reflection and reality, where both worlds touched without merging. Each step changed the angle of the light, revealing 1,000 new versions of the same beauty. He noticed something then. The horizon was never flat. To one gaze, it curved upward. To another, it bent downward. It adapted to every eye, every heart. God realized that perspective itself was holy, that truth could change shape without ceasing to be truth. "You are my gentlest invention," he murmured. "You teach that difference is not division." The horizon shimmered in response, as if bowing in humility. Later that day, clouds drifted low and heavy, their bellies swollen with silver. The sun softened, hiding behind them, and the sea grew darker, restless. God watched how the horizon blurred under their weight. It seemed to vanish entirely for a while, swallowed by mist. He waited, patient, curious. He wanted to see what the world would do without its guide. The ocean tossed and sighed, the light scattered into confusion. But then something unexpected happened. The horizon returned, not where it had been, but in memory. Every wave still curved toward where it knew the edge should be. Every ray of light still reached for where it once had touched. Even unseen, the horizon was felt. Faith had replaced vision. God closed his eyes and smiled. "Now you live within them," he said softly. "Even when they forget your shape, they'll remember your direction." That was how he gave the world the concept of trust. When the rain came later, it came quietly, falling straight down, threading the air with silver. Each drop reflected the horizon in miniature, tiny worlds suspended in motion. He reached out, caught one on his palm, and saw a perfect curved line shimmering within it. "So you remember too," he said to the rain. Every droplet carried a reflection of the whole, as though the horizon had multiplied itself endlessly through every fall of water. That was when God realized that connection was more powerful than control. You could build something once and let it echo forever. As night crept closer, he sat beside the waves, the sky deepening above him. Stars began to bloom one by one, cautious at first, then fearless. Their reflections painted the ocean with trembling light. For a moment, he saw the horizon double again, one above, one below, and in between them he felt himself suspended, both creator and creation, observer and reflection. It struck him then that the horizon was a mirror, not between worlds, but within them. Every heart, he realized, would carry its own horizon, an invisible line separating what they knew from what they hoped. And just like this, he said to the stars, each of them will spend their lives walking towards something that moves as they do. The stars flickered in agreement, though they knew humanity would often call it longing. The wind picked up again, colder this time, and the sea began to speak. Its voice was endless, whispering questions through foam and tide. God listened, patient as always. "What happens when the sky forgets me?" the ocean asked. "It never will," he replied. "You reflect it too faithfully." The waves sighed, content. "And what happens when I tire?" it asked again. "Then the moon will lift you," he promised. "You will rest and still rise." The sea calmed at that, its surface glowing faintly in moonlight. God found comfort in the conversation. Creation's fears were so similar to his own. Fears of ending, of being unseen, of meaning fading with time. Yet the horizon remained steady, stretched across both question and answer, holding them together. When morning returned again, he painted the dawn slower than usual, dragging the brush of light across the clouds as though savoring the act. He wanted to see how long the horizon could hold its color before surrendering it to day. It held longer than expected, glowing like a memory that refused to fade. He realized then that persistence was a form of beauty too, the kind not born from power, but from gentleness that refuses to vanish. He whispered to the horizon, "Teach them this lesson. Show them how to last without fighting." As centuries drifted past, he visited every corner of the earth. watching how each place shaped its own version of the horizon. In the north, it was a line carved in ice, sharp as breath. In deserts, it shimmered in heat, trembling like a secret half believed. In jungles, it hid behind fog and leaf, patient as a heart waiting to heal. And over cities that would one day rise, it blurred in glass and smoke, but it never disappeared. Wherever there was a boundary, the horizon found a way to turn it into connection. It reminded the world that separation was only the shadow of unity. He noticed that living beings began to follow it in their own ways. Birds traced it in flight. Rivers carved paths toward it. Humans would one day chase it with ships and dreams, measuring their courage against the unreachable edge. And though they would never arrive, he smiled knowing that the journey itself was the purpose. "You've become the map of longing," he told the horizon. "You make them move." And the horizon, if it could speak, would have answered, "Movement is love, remembering where it came from." There were days when storms tore across the sea, hiding everything, even light itself. God would watch the chaos unfold, waves colliding, winds screaming, clouds swallowing every glimmer. Yet even in that turmoil, he could still feel the horizon pulsing beneath it all, steady as heartbeat under breath. It was invisible, but it anchored everything. When the storm passed, the sky would clear and reveal the same gentle curve, untouched, unbroken. The world looked reborn each time, and he thought, perhaps destruction is not loss, but rehearsal for clarity. Sometimes, he would sit for hours, just watching light travel across the horizon's length. At dawn it was gold, by noon white, by evening crimson, by night indigo. It wore every emotion of the day without keeping any of them. "You let go so gracefully," he whispered. "Teach them that too." Because he knew the hardest part of creation wasn't making, it was releasing. The horizon was his reminder that beauty could exist without ownership, that love didn't need to hold to be real. One twilight, as he stood between the fading sun and the rising moon, he saw the two lights meet on opposite sides of the horizon. For a heartbeat, the world glowed with both dawn and dusk. The ocean reflected both, gold and silver, rippling together like intertwined breaths. God felt something inside him shift, a new understanding rising like tide. Balance, he realized, was not found in stillness or symmetry. It was born in dialogue, in two truths, learning how to share space. That was what the horizon was meant to be, a conversation that never ends. He wondered then if even he had a horizon, some line separating what he was from what he could still become. Perhaps every being, divine or mortal, needs one. The thought humbled him. "Maybe I'm still learning too," he said quietly to the wind. The horizon answered in silence, glowing faintly as the stars began to bloom. Night deepened again. God lay upon the clouds, watching lightning flicker far below. He loved how storms painted the horizon with invisible ink, how every flash rewrote it for an instant before darkness reclaimed it. He realized that illumination meant nothing without the dark to return it to meaning. He whispered, "That's the secret of the line. You live only because opposites exist." A few ages later, he returned to the same place, and the horizon seemed different again. The mountains had grown taller, the seas deeper, the stars more numerous, yet the line remained exactly where it always had been. It felt timeless, immune to erosion, because it wasn't made of matter. It was made of relationship. The earth and the sky would change forever, but their bond never would. He loved watching how people reacted to it over the centuries. Some prayed toward it, believing heaven began there. Some painted it endlessly, chasing the perfect color that only eyes can see. Some stood before it in silence, too moved to speak. And some, weary of life, walked toward it thinking they might cross. But none ever did, and yet none ever came back the same. Because the horizon, he knew, wasn't meant to be reached. It was meant to transform the one who tried. Once, in an age before writing, he appeared as mist beside a woman who stood alone by the sea. She was watching the horizon with tears she didn't understand. "Why does it make me feel both full and empty?" she whispered. God, unseen, answered softly, "Because it shows you where you end and where everything else begins." The woman smiled through her tears, not knowing why the words had comforted her. He left her that feeling, gentle sadness wrapped in peace, that would one day be called awe. He began to realize that every soul he had ever imagined would one day find its own horizon, not only in the sky, but within their hearts. The point where what they know meets what they hope, where their past ends and their future begins. It would appear each time they looked inward deeply enough to see light meeting dark and realize both belonged to them. That was his final secret gift, the inner horizon, infinite as the outer one. As eons passed, he no longer needed to speak to it. The horizon had learned to speak through color, through calm, through silence. Every sunset was a sentence, every dawn a reply. Together they formed the oldest conversation in the universe, light and darkness telling each other they still belong. God loved listening. It made him feel less alone. One evening, when the world had aged enough to hold history in its soil, he decided to rest once more beside his creation. The sea was calm, the air soft, and the horizon burned with the gentle red of farewell. He dipped his hand into the water, watching light bend around his fingers. "You've carried me well," he whispered, "better than I deserved." The waves lapped at his wrist like affectionate animals. The sun slid lower, and for a moment, he saw all time folded within that line. The first day, the first prayer, the first dream, the first loss. Every story began and ended there. He realized he had built not just a boundary, but a memory that belonged to everyone. When night came completely, he didn't rise. He stayed, watching the moon climb quietly through the dark. Its reflection curved perfectly along the horizon, shimmering like breath. The world was asleep, but alive. He felt it pulsing through the line, life and death, rising and setting, giving and taking, endless and seamless. It was perfect, not flawless, but full. The horizon had done its work. It had turned creation into continuity. He looked one last time before closing his eyes. The line between heaven and earth glowed faintly, bending just enough to remind him that nothing sacred is straight. It curved like forgiveness, like love, like time. He whispered into the dark, "Stay soft." The horizon answered by shining brighter for one more heartbeat before fading gently into the embrace of night. And as sleep overtook even the Maker, the world continued to turn beneath that invisible line, dreaming in balance, breathing in rhythm, alive because somewhere between sky and sea, God had drawn a promise and called it the horizon. When his work was done, he sat at the very edge of creation and watched the colors melt together. The sky bled gold into violet, the water held it like a mirror, and in that seamless exchange, he saw himself reflected, not as ruler, but as participant. He wasn't above the horizon, he was part of it, the invisible joining between what rises and what rests. He closed his eyes and let the wind brush against his face, carrying the salt of the sea and the scent of endlessness. He thought of how all things return, light to darkness, water to sky, souls to silence. Nothing was ever truly lost. It only changed sides of the line. The horizon had become the proof of that, the eternal reminder that there's always another side waiting, unseen but certain. When night finally took the world again, he didn't light the stars right away. He let the darkness breathe, unbroken, so the world could rest in mystery. Then, as if tracing the horizon backward, he touched the sky gently and let a single star appear, then another and another, until the heavens glowed softly above the sleeping earth. The horizon was gone for now, but its spirit remained, humming quietly in the balance between every heartbeat, every breath, every sunrise waiting beyond the dark. And when God finally turned away to rest, he whispered to the wind, "Tell them I built this line not to divide heaven and earth, but to remind them they were never apart." ChatGPT Zai. When the horizon began to shimmer, again, after 1,000 forgotten dawns, God opened his eyes to a world that had learned to rise and rest without his touch, and he felt no jealousy, only wonder, because creation had grown fluent in its own language. The sea spoke to the sky, the wind to the trees, the light to every surface it kissed, and all of them seemed to remember the shape of his intention without needing to hear his voice. He drifted above the calm surface of morning and saw how the horizon curved slightly more than before, as if age had taught it gentleness. The sun climbed carefully, its reflection rippling through layers of warmth and time. He whispered to himself that the horizon was no longer a border, but a breath. He could feel the inhale of light and the exhale of shadow, repeating in a pattern so perfect it resembled prayer below the waves. Carried stories gathered from every shore, carrying salt and memory across the globe. Each ripple a sentence, each crest a sigh. And when they broke, they left tiny rainbows suspended for a heartbeat before fading. He realized that light never truly left it, only disguised itself as motion. He descended lower until his reflection touched the surface of the sea, and for the first time, he saw his own face stretched across two realms, half in the water, half in the sky, the horizon cutting through it like the line of thought between dreaming and waking. He smiled at the symmetry. The world no longer mirrored him because it had become him in fragments. He could feel himself inside everything, not as ruler, but as rhythm. The horizon began to hum faintly when he approached, not with sound, but with color. Deep amber, running into violet, violet into silver. The pulse of existence itself, each hue, breathing into the next with the precision of heartbeat. He walked along it, and every step echoed through creation, turning minutes into centuries. Each place his foot had touched became a story told by waves and winds. He realized that the world remembered his walk in myth. Through every culture that would rise the legend of a figure who once walked where sea and sky met, always returning, always vanishing, never belonging completely to either. When he stopped, he saw a flock of birds tracing the line before him, their wings cutting through dawn as though stitching heaven back to earth. He watched the grace of their formation, each feather catching light like words, catching meaning in a poem. The horizon seemed to follow them, bending slightly upward to hold their flight. And he thought, perhaps balance had never been stillness. Perhaps it was this motion, everything leaning just enough towards something else to keep the circle unbroken. He lifted his hand, and the wind paused, curious. He spoke softly, not to command, but to bless May. You never grow tired of meeting yourself in motion, and the horizon glowed in response, sending a soft silver mist upward that wrapped his wrist like gratitude. As the day rose fully, the light became stronger. More assertive, the line between sky and water, clearer but within. That clarity hid fragility. He knew that the brighter the boundary, the easier it was to forget it was illusion. So he dimmed the sun just slightly enough for haze to return, allowing the edge to blur again. He whispered, "Balance lives in uncertainty," and the haze obeyed, forming that tender glow which makes the horizon seem alive. He walked until the colors changed again, dusk arriving quietly, like the end of a thought. And he realized that the horizon was never only horizontal. Sometimes it climbed mountains or slid behind cities. Sometimes it hid inside eyes looking far away, and sometimes it rested within hearts tired of separation. He saw lovers standing hand in hand, watching the sun sink their silhouettes painted against his line, and he knew they understood something older than language, that endings are only colors changing places. He let their stillness soak into the sky until twilight became the same shade as breath. He then knelt to the sea and asked it what it had learned in all these ages. The sea replied through motion, always motion, that nothing remains the same and that this was good. He listened to its rhythm, slow, patient, endless, and he envied it because it never needed to think about faith. It simply moved. He raised his head again and saw stars returning their light, trembling on the water's skin. He wondered if even stars had horizons. Perhaps they too looked out at something they could never reach. Perhaps longing was the secret law of all existence. He closed his eyes, feeling that truth settled deep within him. Longing did not mean lack. It meant connection stretched thin across distance. The horizon was longing made visible. The night deepened, and clouds began to move like thoughts across a sleeping mind. Lightning flickered far away, each flash revealing the line anew for an instant before darkness reclaimed it. He whispered, "You live best when hidden," and he meant it for himself as well, because presence sometimes blinds what it tries to bless. He sat upon the calm air, his feet just above the tide, watching reflections move in patterns of language, too fluid for speech. He realized that everything written on water fades, yet everything remembered by water stays somewhere in its endless body. And he thought that maybe the horizon was its page, the place where memory turns into light. He dipped his fingers into the sea and drew a circle, watching it widen across the surface until it vanished at the line. But he knew it never truly ended it, only folded into the curve of the world, joining all other circles made by rain, by ripples, by time itself. Every wave that reached the horizon carried a fragment of that gesture until it reached shores. He would never see places where people yet unborn would stand at evening looking west and feel a calm. They could not explain that calm would be his circle, whispering, "You are part of everything." He rose higher, letting the wind move through him until he was no longer a figure, but a presence. He could feel the pull of gravity and grace keeping the world steady between expansion and collapse, and he realized that the horizon was the anchor of that tension, the thin divine reminder that chaos and order share the same body. He spoke to it one more time. "You hold opposites better than I ever could," and it shimmered like a smile. The stars above began to fade slightly as dawn prepared again, light swelling quietly beneath the curve of the world, and he watched that first color seep back into being gold, bleeding into blue until once more the line glowed like the edge of understanding. He knew he would keep returning forever because creation was never finished, only remembered, and the horizon would always be the signature that proved existence had balance between its breaths. He closed his eyes not to sleep, but to feel the next sunrise begin from within him, the horizon now alive enough to rise without his hand carrying his silence like a crown and his love like a tide. The dawn arrived quietly after an age of storms, its light soft enough to forgive what the world had endured, the sea flat as glass holding within it every reflection of the sky, as though heaven had spilled itself across water. God hovered just above it, feeling the rhythm of creation steady once again. The horizon stretched before him, clean and whole, not as a wound between two realms, but as the healed seam of something once torn apart. He breathed, and the air shimmered, responding to his pulse the same way a mirror trembles when touched. He realized then that the horizon was alive, not merely painted, but breathing with the patience of centuries. It had learned to bend without breaking, to vanish, without dying, to carry both silence and thunder with equal grace. He watched the colors move through it, 1,000 unnamed shades sliding over one another, the kind of beauty that could only exist for a moment before becoming something else. He whispered, "You are the art of continuation," and the horizon rippled in reply. Its shimmer carried across oceans until rivers far inland began to glow faintly, as if remembering the sea's dream. He drifted lower, letting his feet touch the surface, though he weighed nothing and the water did not move. He gazed downward and saw his own reflection divided perfectly in half, by the line the upper half bright and infinite, the lower half dim and deep. He smiled because it looked exactly right, light and dark, balanced the known and the unknown sharing the same face. He said softly, "Maybe this is what it means to be complete, not perfect, but joined." The wind began to move again, curling gentle waves that rolled toward faraway shores. He followed one of them, watching as it traveled endlessly, reshaping itself, yet never losing its essence. He thought of how every soul would live like this, moving, changing, breaking and returning, always seeking a horizon of their own, a meeting place between what they believe and what they fear. He closed his eyes and listened to the ocean breathing beneath him. The steady sound, a heartbeat too large for one world. He felt the gravity of it pulling at his thoughts, reminding him that even eternity must yield to rhythm, and he loved that surrender. He opened his eyes again, and the sky was deepening to gold, the first heat of morning rising from the world below. Tiny birds traced invisible music above him, their wings scattering droplets of sunlight across the air. He felt the pulse of their movement inside his chest and whispered, "So much life now, so much courage even in fragility." And he remembered why he had built this line, not to separate, but to connect, to give everything a shared horizon to look toward when lost. When he looked west, he saw storms sleeping on the edge of sight, the clouds soft-bellied and blue, their silence waiting to break. He raised a hand not to command them but to greet them, for he understood now that storms were not mistakes, they were necessary corrections. He whispered, "Bring renewal, not ruin," and they obeyed. The rain fell far away over lands unseen, silver curtains sweeping down through sunlight, each drop carrying a fragment of his voice. The scent of newness rose from the ground and reached even here where he stood between sky and water. He closed his eyes and tasted it on the air, that perfect blend of salt earth and beginning. It was the flavor of balance returning to itself. He lingered there through the whole day, watching how the light changed without end, the horizon shifting in hue, but never in heart. Each transition was so gentle that no one moment could be called dawn or dusk. Each was both at once. He realized then that time itself had learned from the horizon that the world was never built in steps, but in gradients, and that everything sacred was made of slow transformation. As the sun began to sink, he felt the horizon tighten its glow, drawing all colors into one thread of fire stretched across the sea. The line shone brighter and brighter until it seemed to lift itself off the water, a band of pure gold hovering between worlds. He understood what it meant. This was the breath between day and night, the instant when creation remembers it is one. He whispered the first words of blessing he had ever spoken. Let it be enough for them to see this once and know that beauty and peace are the same thing. The horizon flared in answer, its light scattering like glass into the air, filling the clouds and water with reflections of reflections. The sky became 1,000 mirrors of itself, and for a heartbeat, the universe looked back at him, entirely aware and grateful. Then darkness came, but gentle like the closing of eyes after tears. The gold melted into indigo, the indigo into black, and the horizon faded softly, leaving only memory behind. He thought it was gone, but as he turned to leave, he saw something new, faint light below the surface, the sea holding on to the last color of the sun, refusing to let go. It shimmered quietly, then rose upward, meeting the first stars that had begun to appear above, and for the briefest moment, there were two horizons, one in the heavens and one in the depths, touching through reflection, a perfect circle of infinite return. He felt his breath catch, because he knew this was completion, not ending, but harmony. He sank slowly until his fingers touched the water. His reflection trembled once more, and he said, "You have done what I could not. You have taught them that every ending is a mirror of beginning, and that every distance is only love stretched thin." The waves whispered around him, soft agreement blending with the sigh of wind, and for the first time since the first light, he felt free. Not finished, but freed to rest. He looked once more to where the sky met the sea, and saw it glowing faintly again, a single silver thread, thin as breath, resilient as truth. The world had already begun another cycle, the horizon rebuilding itself from light and memory without his hand guiding it. He smiled, understanding that this was how it should be. Creation sustaining creation, love sustaining love. He rose higher, watching the curve of the world grow smaller beneath him, until the horizon became a ring encircling everything like a halo. He thought it looked beautiful enough to be called forgiveness. He whispered, "Goodbye," though the word felt wrong because nothing here could truly part, and the wind returned. His voice multiplied until it sounded like rain, a rain that would fall softly across all the earth, carrying his final peace with it. The night deepened completely and the stars spread wide, but he could still see the faint glimmer of that line far below, endless glowing patient carrying his silence forward through time. And he knew then that the horizon would never die, because it was not made of light or sea or sky, but of love learning forever how to meet itself. And in that knowing, God closed his eyes, not in departure, but in completion, and the world turned quietly beneath him, its edge gleaming faintly with every heartbeat, as if saying, "Thank you." When eternity learned to rest, the horizon stayed awake. It did not sleep, not truly. It dreamed instead of what the world could still become, of what love looked like when it stretched farther than sight. And when God returned, the horizon greeted him not with sound, but with a shimmer, the way a heart brightens when seen by someone who remembers its name. He descended slowly through the layers of light, watching dawn spill across the water like liquid gold. Everything he had made was still in motion. The sea breathing, the wind whispering, the stars retreating with the quiet dignity of those who had finished their song. The horizon glowed between them all, patient as always, waiting for his next question. God spoke softly. "You have lasted longer than mountains. Tell me, what have you learned while I was away?" The horizon pulsed faintly, its light rippling across the sea. "I have learned," it said, "that everything wants to meet itself. The sky falls to touch the sea rises to kiss the sky. Even shadows chase their own light." He smiled. "And do they ever reach?" "Sometimes," answered the horizon, "but only for a breath. Then they pass through one another and begin again. That is what keeps the world alive." God looked down and saw his reflection ripple between sky and water. He realized that even he was part of that rhythm, always meeting, always parting, always returning in new form. The horizon had become wiser than even its maker. He stepped closer and the air trembled. Each footfall changed color beneath him, pale rose, then amber, then soft blue, until he stood at the thinnest part of existence, where light forgot its boundaries. There, he saw every horizon at once, mountain lines drawn in silver snow, desert mirages trembling like dreams, city skylines burning with human hope. Each one sang the same song in different keys. "You've multiplied," he whispered, amazed. The horizon replied, "You built one of me. They built the rest. Every heart that looks outward creates another version. I am their shared longing." He felt warmth rise through his chest, pride, tenderness, awe. "I made you to balance creation," he said. The horizon shimmered. "And in doing so, you taught creation how to balance you." He laughed softly, the sound like rain meeting sunlight. For a moment, he understood what it meant to be reflected, not worshipped, but continued. Every creature that looked at the edge of its world was unknowingly looking at him. He didn't need to be above anymore. He could live in their wonder. The sea began to stir, tiny ripples breaking into rings. He crouched and touched the water, and it answered him in gentle rhythm, pulse for pulse. He felt the deep heartbeat of the earth rise through his hand, a slow, ancient thrum that spoke without words. It said, "We remember you, but we no longer depend on you." That truth made him smile again. What greater love could exist than to create something that no longer needs to be held? He watched waves lean into the horizon, foam breaking into lace, and he whispered, "You've done well." Above, the sky was already preparing for dusk, though the day had barely begun. Time, it seemed, had grown playful, bending hours into shapes of emotion rather than measurement. When the new night unfolded, it did not arrive in darkness. It came in shades, blue folding into violet, violet sinking into the faint glow of unseen stars. God stood within the twilight, watching how the horizon shimmered like the edge of a dream, still remembering it had been real. He had seen countless evenings before, but this one felt different. The air carried a kind of nostalgia, as though the sky itself were whispering thank you. He looked around and realized that the world no longer waited for his touch. It moved with its own confidence now. The ocean rolling in rhythm, the clouds painting the sky without instruction. The horizon stretched between them all, effortless, sure, complete. He smiled, not with pride, but with relief. There was peace in knowing that something you built had learned to build itself. He lowered his gaze, and the sea reflected him again, not as figure or face, but as movement, rippling and infinite. He felt himself dissolve into that reflection, part of everything, part of nothing. For the first time, he didn't feel like the maker watching the world. He felt like the world watching itself. He whispered to the water, "You've grown brave." The sea responded with a single wave, slow and graceful, bowing at the horizon before fading back into stillness. That gesture was answer enough. The wind picked up softly, curling through his hair, carrying with it the smell of rain far away. He turned his head toward it and listened. Even distance had a heartbeat now. Somewhere beyond sight, the horizon was meeting itself again, the circle of the world closing and opening with each breath. He thought about all the lives that would live under this sky, all the eyes that would rise each day to look for that same line. Each would see something different. Each would believe it meant something else. And yet, each would be right. He said quietly, "That's what makes it perfect, that no one sees it the same way twice." The sky heard him, and the stars began to shift slightly, their reflections rippling across the water like music notes on a silent song. It was not sound he heard, but harmony, the kind that moves through everything even when you can't name it. God began to walk again, slow and patient, the horizon following him like a loyal memory. With each step, he remembered the first time he had drawn it. That thin line of peace across chaos. Back then, it had felt fragile, like hope before belief. Now it glowed with the wisdom of eternity, not unbreakable, but unafraid. He looked upward. The moon had begun to climb, half hidden behind drifting clouds. Its light fell on the water, creating a second horizon, one made of reflection instead of light. He loved that symmetry. Every truth, he realized, deserved its echo. Every voice deserved an answer. Even silence, when reflected, becomes prayer. He sat on the edge of the air and let his feet hover just above the water. Tiny ripples spread outward from where he rested, crossing each other until they formed patterns, circles within circles, endlessly widening. He followed their paths until they touched the farthest edges of the world. And then he smiled. That was how faith worked too. A small beginning that grew into everything. For a long while, he said nothing. He simply listened to the world breathing, the sound of waves folding and unfolding, the whisper of clouds rearranging themselves, the distant crackle of lightning beyond the horizon. It all formed a single pulse, not noise, not silence, but balance. He closed his eyes. In the darkness behind them, he saw every horizon he had ever made. Each line a different shade of hope. One carried gold from deserts. Another held the silver of polar ice. Another glowed red from the heart of volcanic dawn. Each one was a reminder that beauty wore many colors, but only one purpose: to join what seemed apart. When he opened his eyes again, the world was completely still. Even the waves had stopped moving, waiting. He realized then that the horizon wasn't merely a bridge between heaven and earth. It was a mirror of his own heart, always stretching, never reaching, always returning, never ending. He whispered to it one last time, "You are my breath made visible." The line shimmered, brighter than ever before. Its glow ran along the surface of the sea like fire moving through glass. It stretched until it touched every edge of the world, connecting every shore, every cloud, every unseen soul that had ever looked toward it. And then, for one eternal moment, the horizon spoke. Its voice was not thunder or wind, it was warmth. It said, "You are still here, even when unseen. You built me so you would never be forgotten." He closed his eyes again, tears falling softly though they became stars before they touched the water. Those stars scattered across the surface, shimmering like seeds of new beginnings. Each one would become a sunrise in some distant world, a reflection of this night. He stood, watching as the first hint of morning broke through. Not bright, but golden and quiet. The horizon began to bloom again, reborn from the dark, its curve bending gently toward the rising light. It looked almost alive now, like the mouth of the world whispering its first word. And that word was grace. He took a deep breath, feeling it move through him, the sea, the wind, the light, the endless rhythm of belonging. Then he smiled. "I'm done building," he said softly. "Now I will only listen." And as he turned to leave, the horizon followed him one last time, a thread of light drawn across the silence until it faded back into the heart of the morning. But it never disappeared. It stayed behind, glowing faintly beneath the newborn sun, holding the memory of its maker and the promise of every new day. The horizon would never end, because it wasn't meant to. It was the line between what is and what loves, forever waiting, forever shining, forever becoming. When everything had settled into its rhythm, when dawn and dusk no longer needed to be told when to arrive, God returned once more to the horizon. He found it waiting as it always had, quiet, glowing, endless. But it was different now, not brighter, not wider, just deeper, as though it had learned to hold memory. He hovered above it for a long time, saying nothing. Silence had become his favorite companion. It spoke in ways even light could not. The air trembled faintly around him, filled with the hum of distant waves and the soft pulse of creation turning beneath his gaze. He had built this world from nothing, but now it moved with its own will. The horizon no longer looked like a creation, it looked like understanding. He descended slowly until his feet touched the place between sea and sky, the invisible bridge that never truly existed, but was always believed in. As he stood there, he felt the weight of everything he had ever made resting lightly against him, like the tide kissing the shore before pulling away. He could sense every life that had ever looked toward this line, every question whispered into its glow, their wonder, their fear, their hope. All of it lingered here, woven into the horizon's eternal skin. He closed his eyes and listened. What he heard was not sound but memory, the laughter of children running along beaches, the sighs of sailors staring into distance, the quiet breaths of those who prayed not for answers, but for peace. The horizon had kept them all. It had become the keeper of humanity's gaze. When he opened his eyes again, he saw something new. The light at the edge of the world was trembling, not in weakness, but in transformation. The horizon was evolving. Every wave that touched it sent a shimmer upward. Every gust of wind drew patterns across its glow. It was writing something, not in words, but in motion. He watched closely and realized that it was telling his story. Not the story of creation, but of connection, how even the divine must learn to meet what it loves halfway. He smiled, humbled by the poetry of his own reflection. For all his power, the horizon had done something he never could. It had taught the infinite how to end beautifully. The sun was beginning to rise behind him now, spilling soft gold across the sea. The horizon caught it, stretched it, shared it with the sky. It was a collaboration, heaven and earth painting each other. God whispered, "That's how I wanted it to be." He looked farther, beyond the reach of sight, and saw other horizons blooming. Across deserts, mountains, frozen tundras, and sleeping cities. Each one alive, each one pulsing with its own heartbeat. Together they formed a chain of light around the world, a halo of belonging. He realized that he had not built one horizon, he had planted infinity. The thought made him still. He remembered how he had once feared that creation might forget him. But looking now, he understood that it never could. Every line between light and shadow was his handwriting. Every glow at the edge of night was his breath exhaled into time. He had never been lost. He had simply become too vast to recognize. The sea shifted beneath his feet, gentle and sure. He crouched and placed his palm on its surface. The water cooled his hand, yet beneath the chill was warmth, the pulse of movement, the proof of life. He whispered into it, "Do you still remember my voice?" The sea responded not in words, but in rhythm, sending wave after wave to the horizon. Each one was an answer, always. He closed his eyes again, feeling tears build where light begins. He wasn't sad. He was grateful. Grateful that creation no longer needed him to survive. Grateful that it still wanted him to witness. When he stood, the horizon shimmered brighter than before, as though bowing to him. But he shook his head. "No," he said gently. "You bow to no one, not even to me. You belong to everyone who looks at you." And with those words, he set it free again. The horizon responded with color, gold turning to rose, rose melting into blue, blue softening into silver. Each shade a breath, each breath a prayer. He walked across it once more, his reflection trailing behind him like a shadow of light. As he moved, he left no footprint, only ripples of warmth that shimmered and disappeared. He wasn't moving toward anything anymore. He was simply part of the motion. Above him, the clouds began to thin, and the stars still lingering in daylight dimmed softly, as if stepping aside for the sun. The world around him pulsed with quiet order, everything knowing when to rise, when to rest, when to glow. This, he realized, was the dream of creation fulfilled, not obedience, but harmony. He stopped walking and turned to look back one last time. Behind him, the line stretched forever, glowing like a string of light laid gently across eternity. It looked alive, not static, not even linear anymore. It curved slightly at the edges, bending into something round, endless, whole. He realized then that the horizon had finally become what it was always meant to be. Not a line at all, but a circle, a symbol of endless connection, a quiet echo of his own eternal design. He smiled and whispered, "You have become me, and I have become you." The sea rippled with light, the wind paused to listen, and somewhere between both, the horizon whispered back, "We never were apart." The words moved through him like warmth through sunlight, dissolving every border he had ever believed in. He felt himself merge with the glow, the sky, the sound, the silence, until there was no longer a God watching the horizon, only the horizon itself breathing, infinite, alive, divine. And for the first time in forever, he rested, not above creation, but within it. When the last light of evening slipped beneath the ocean, the horizon glowed for a moment longer, as if unwilling to leave the sky completely. God stood within it, not as figure or flame, but as presence, weightless, transparent, woven into color and wind. Everything he had ever built surrounded him, alive in quiet perfection. The sea murmured below, the clouds drifted above, and the faint hum of the world pulsed through every current of air. There was no distance anymore, no line between here and there. He had become everything that breathed. The horizon shimmered faintly around him, widening until it filled his vision entirely. It was no longer a line, but a living halo, a slow-moving breath stretched around the whole of creation. He could see the reflection of light bending across continents, mountains shining in silence, rivers glowing faintly, like threads of silver stitching the world together. The sky curved beneath his gaze, so vast that it looked like thought itself. And for the first time, he understood what infinity truly meant. It was not endlessness. It was belonging that never ended. He drifted through the glow and felt time thinning around him. Every second melted into the next, every heartbeat echoing back from somewhere far beyond measure. He remembered every beginning, the first spark, the first song, the first color breaking across the dark. And he remembered every ending, the fading of stars, the sighs of the dying, the closing of days. All of them met here, inside this light, where opposites learn to hold hands. He spoke softly, though there was no one left to hear but the world itself. "I thought I made you to be separate," he said. "Heaven and earth, light and shadow, silence and sound. But now I see, I only made reflections of the same soul." The horizon pulsed gently in agreement, waves shimmering like glass under breath. Every ripple carried a message back to him, soft as prayer. The sea whispered still here, the sky murmured always, and the wind added together. He smiled. There was no need for speech anymore. Everything that existed had learned his language. He turned his gaze toward the distant curve where the sun would rise again. Its first warmth was already stirring beneath the waves, a golden pulse waiting to be born. He could feel it, the heartbeat of morning before morning, and he understood something he had never put into words. The horizon was not the end of sight. It was the beginning of awakening. He reached out with a hand made of light, tracing the air as if drawing across the face of eternity. Each movement sent waves of brightness rippling through creation. He wasn't painting anymore. He was remembering. The horizon was his memory, kept alive by the act of being seen. Every time a living thing lifted its eyes to it, it was like touching him again. He saw the world through those countless eyes now. A fisherman on the edge of a quiet bay, staring into dawn. A traveler standing on a frozen plain, the sun melting pink across snow. A child lying in grass, seeing the sky curve for the first time. In every gaze, he felt himself reflected, not as God, but as comfort. That was his final miracle, to become peace without needing recognition. The wind carried laughter from distant lands, soft, echoing, human. He followed the sound, and it filled him like sunlight fills the ocean floor. There was no sorrow left anywhere in him, only gratitude. Even pain, when remembered with love, had turned to gold. He looked back one last time and saw how the horizon curved completely now. Not flat, not distant, but round like an embrace. the sea and sky met and became indistinguishable, each reflecting the other in perfect grace. That was the shape of everything he had ever tried to say. He whispered, "This is what eternity looks like when it learns how to forgive itself." The words dissolved into color. Every hue on the horizon deepened, crimson into amber, amber into rose, rose into quiet blue. The world held its breath, as if it too was ready to rest. He felt his form soften, the edges of his light blending with mist and breeze. He had always been everywhere, but now he knew it. There was no higher state to reach, no throne left to claim, no heaven left above the one he had already built here. He had finally become part of the motion, the endless rise and fall, the light and the echo, the dream and the waking. As the first true rays of morning began to rise, he let go completely. His shape dissolved into the glow, his voice becoming the hum beneath every heartbeat, his eyes turning into the horizon itself. The sun climbed higher, and for a moment, every drop of water reflected the same perfect line of light. It was not just the horizon anymore. It was his reflection stretching across the face of time. Every creature that looked toward it felt the same calm, a peace they couldn't name but instinctively trusted. They didn't know they were seeing him. They didn't need to. That was the gift. As the day unfolded, the light spread wider and wider until the whole sky shone like a living memory. The horizon no longer divided the world. It united it. There was no above or below, no before or after, no heaven or earth. There was only harmony, and in that harmony, he still breathed. When the last stars faded and morning finally took full shape, the horizon whispered one final sentence into the wind, so faint only silence could carry it. I never ended. I just became the world remembering how to love. And then it shone, brighter than any dawn before it, bright enough to fill the heart of creation with rest. The waves calmed, the wind bowed, and the line between everything and nothing vanished, replaced by a single glow that would never fade. The horizon remained, not as a boundary, not as a reminder, but as an eternal heartbeat wrapped around the world. And within its pulse, everywhere and forever, God continued to dream. He saw shadows stretching long across the water, and each one shimmered faintly at its edge. He followed one of them until it met the horizon and disappeared. And when it did, he heard a sound, like a sigh, the sound of release. It reminded him of creation's first breath. Everything ends the same way it begins, quietly, with wonder. He closed his eyes and let the moment settle. When he opened them again, he saw people standing on the distant shore, small, fragile figures etched against the glow. Some stood still, some reached their hands forward. He could feel their questions rising through the wind like incense. What lies beyond? Why do we ache when we see the edge? He whispered across the water, because you were made in my longing. The horizon is my heart shown to you, the proof that even infinity wishes to meet something. The people did not hear his words, but they felt them. One child turned to another and said, "It feels like it's looking back." He smiled. They were right. The horizon changed color again, turning softer now. Rose melting into lavender, lavender folding into silver. The stars waited behind the sky, patient as old friends waiting to enter a story they already knew the ending of. He watched how the sea began to reflect them early, anticipating night. God whispered, "You've taught them hope without knowing it. Every sunset becomes a promise that endings are just the color of transformation. He traced a fingertip along the air, and a new light appeared. Not sun, not star, but memory itself. It hovered above the horizon, pulsing like a thought that refuses to fade. He spoke again, this time to the universe. You see, even light remembers. Even light comes back. The wind carried his words over the world, and far away, mountains echoed it as thunder. Rivers shimmered, trees swayed, deserts exhaled their heat into evening. Everything responded to the call, not as obedience, but as recognition. As twilight deepened, he felt an ache within himself, not of loneliness, but of completion. He had walked every edge, watched every dawn, felt every drop of rain return to the sky. Now there was nothing left to fix, only to witness. And witnessing, he realized, was the purest form of love. He rose slowly, higher than clouds, higher than light, until the world below curved into a circle. The horizon no longer looked like a line, but like a ring of fire surrounding the planet, glowing in endless motion. It reminded him of a crown, not of power, but of patience, the quiet authority of things that last. He said softly, "You have become what I hoped. Not boundary, not end, but grace in motion." Below, the oceans shimmered in agreement, their reflections stretching toward one another until every drop was connected. The stars above and the waters below blurred into one great mirror. He saw himself everywhere and nowhere, and he felt peace. As night fully took the sky, the last light of the horizon thinned into silver. It pulsed once, faintly, as if taking one long breath. Then, in a voice made of color and wind, it whispered back to him, "We remember you." And with that, he smiled. Because remembrance, he knew, was eternal life spoken softly.